a spin machine. Gaily they talked each campaign day, orators both of course. One little Pole then had a mishap, broke off his interview date, wept for his quals, then cried with joy as the spin doctor said, "Do you think I would leave you waning when there's a dead cat bounce to do? Climb up here, Boris, and don't be crying. I can fix it with a surrogate or two. When they grow up, they'll both be poles, and the stalking horses will not be toys. And I wonder if we'll remember when they were four surrogate boys." Short months passed, Brino came so fast. Cowardly they swerved to stay. Electorate roared aloud, but in the woke crowd, cheering not dismay. Up goes a shout, Junker dashes out for the shadows blue. Gallops away where Jezza lay, then came a voice he knew. "Did you think I would let you exit when there's grooming left to do? Climb up here, Jez, I will show you what the Fourth Reich will do." "Did you say, Junker, I'm all a tremble? Perhaps it's the media's noise, but I think it's that I remember when we were two little poles. Do you think I would let you Brexit? There's no democracy for you. Climb up here, Boz, I will show you back to the Nazi ranks so blue. Can you feel, Boz, I'm all a tremble? Perhaps it's the battle's noise, but I think it's that I remember when we were into little boys." Okay, hello Grub Street Journal, etc. Hello YouTube. My timing was a bit out on that, but you get the idea. That's the Rolf Harris song, "Two Little Boys," which I adopted the words in a blog this morning. Just for people who don't know who Rolf Harris is, he was a television entertainer from Australia that became famous on the BBC. This is an interesting advert for Whisper chocolate bars in 2009. Now, this was before there was a very large scandal where Harris was actually swept up in all of the Jimmy Savile revelations at the BBC and was convicted for child molestation. There's a clue to the title here and some of the words there of this blog, which is "Two little poles had two little quals. Do you see what it is yet?" Now, that was Harris's catchphrase when he would do paintings, which were figurative but kind of abstract, and as he drew the outline of the painting, what it was of would emerge, and he'd said, "Do you see what it is yet?" And in this election, I'm asking the same question. Have you cottoned on yet to what this is all about? Have you cottoned on to this slogan of Boris, "Get Brexit done"? There we are. And oh, what's it say? "Being extorted." Aha, do you see what it is yet? Get Brexit done. So, coming into the last quarter of the race and awaiting the televised manicured soundbite programme featuring Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson this evening, why would I make allusion to Rolf Harris and his catchphrase? Do you see what it is yet? Get Brexit done. Okay, we've heard Boris say that rather a lot, but it was pointed out the other day that's actually an anagram of being extorted. A gentleman called Neville Farmer came up with this, and it appeared in a friend of mine's Facebook page. So I found it fascinating and decided to just make this this anagram animation. Get Brexit done, being extorted. So this whole idea of Quals, which is basically the qualitative polling about the popularity of candidates, and Boris Johnson said in an old interview on the BBC that Lytton Crosby, his spin doctor, says it's the Quals that lead the quants, mate, he says. And there's a link to that video in this blog, and I linked to it in another one the other day. I decided to look at the Quals, as it were. So I spent yesterday figuring out a way to graph leadership approval figures for the three main party leaders this time round, which obviously is Boris Johnson, Conservative, Jeremy Corbyn, Labour, and Joe Swinson, Liberal Democrat. The others are also RANs, and the Liberal Democrats, whilst they have been polling in double figures, could also become also RANs as well, according and a lot of that I think may actually hinge on two things. The first thing being the BBC, what they're calling the live debate, but which I call sarcastically here the manicured soundbite programme. And the other one is the Andrew Neil interview, and I'm going to play now on the BBC the Andrew Neil challenge to Boris Johnson, where he says it's not too late to participate. If I can just find it, I thought I had it here earlier. Let's have a look. This is all live, and I've got some windows planned out, but oh no, here it is. Here, look, there we are. Right. So let's just go back to the beginning here, and let's listen to what Andrew Neil's got to say.
There is, of course, still one to be done. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister. We have been asking him for weeks now to give us a date, a time, a venue. As of now, none has been forthcoming. No broadcaster can compel a politician to be interviewed, but leaders' interviews have been a key part of the BBC's primetime election coverage for decades. We do them on your behalf to scrutinise and hold to account those who would govern us. That is democracy. We've always proceeded in good faith that the leaders would participate. And in every election, they have. All of them. Until this one. It is not too late. We have an interview prepared, oven ready, as Mr. Johnson likes to say. The theme running through our questions is trust, and why so many times in his career, in politics and journalism, critics and sometimes even those close to him have deemed him to be untrustworthy. It is, of course, relevant to what he is promising us all now. Can he be trusted to deliver 50,000 more nurses, and almost 20,000 in his numbers are already working for the NHS? He promises 40 new hospitals, and only 6 are scheduled to be built by 2025. Can he be believed when he claims another 34 will be built in the 5 years after that? Can he be trusted to fund the NHS properly?
I've got a bit of a buffering issue here at the moment, guys, but let's persevere. Okay, where are we? Let's get back to Andrew Neil.
Years after that. Can he be trusted to fund the NHS properly?
We'll come back to that one. I'm going to go through the rest of the video because there's obviously a streaming problem with that, but looking at the stream here, it's live. Warning, please check video resolution not optimal. Well, that doesn't usually make a difference to the stream. I think streaming live the BBC, there's probably a problem getting through the YouTube censors. But anyway, you get a good sense of what Andrew Neil is saying there, and I wanted to play that live, and I'm going to play it live at the end because I want to get a transcript of what he said to do some more analysis of his questions for Boris Johnson. So back to the blog, and that was the second thing, the debate tonight and the impact of that Andrew Neil challenge. If Boris Johnson doesn't actually do that interview, I think it will affect the qualitative polling on Boris Johnson. There are questions over Brino, there are questions over trustworthiness, and the Johnson camp, if you like, which includes people in the Brexit Party and the Labour Party as well, the Blue Labour sort of, you know, Johnson is basically very Blairite, son of Blair, Blair being Margaret Thatcher's greatest achievement by her own words. So I think that is significant. So anyway, in terms of looking at this leadership approval thing, which if words again from Boris Johnson's mouth, you know, it's the quals that lead the quant mate, which is something that Lytton Crosby says. Another Boris Johnson quote of Lytton Crosby is, you can't fatten a pig on market day. There's another one, there are videos I have with Crosby saying that over and over again. He does say it. There's one with Boris Johnson actually quoting it as well when he was mayor, and Crosby famously led the campaigns for Boris to be mayor. So my graphing exercise is still ongoing, but here's my tabulated raw data. Now there's a link there to the spreadsheet that I've built, and this is just taking all the data out of the relevant Wikipedia articles. So 2019 here, there are the three. I mentioned Jeremy Corbyn, Boris Johnson and Swinson, and then if you scroll down, it morphs from when Theresa May came in. There is a note by one of the things, was it July, Mrs May comes in here, look, 3rd to the 5th of July, so she was very unpopular. Corbyn was always a bit more unpopular, but you know, not much to say the difference considering the amount of what we can say is Mrs May did it all by herself. You know, the media have gone out their way to be supportive to her, but just by being her, she was unpopular. Jeremy Corbyn hasn't done it all by himself, and we'll get to that. Then there are the other sheets here. So this is the 5 years from 2010 to 2015 when it was Miliband, Cameron and Clegg. And Clegg's figures are quite amazingly bad. You can see, look, 63% here. I mean, he peaks at 65% unpopularity. And here, Ed Miliband again, he's, you know, regularly in the minus 50 odd percent. Now, just in terms of the headings, it's approve, disapprove, don't know, and then the net approval rate. These are Cameron's figures. So Cameron got to even Stevens, but I can't see any positives here. At the beginning of his term, usually there's a bit of a honeymoon period, and so here we are. We've got a +2 here in May 2011. Have we got any other pluses? Even Stevens here. Right, so he maxes out at +15 in November. What's this here? This is from my graphing efforts. So, and then here, curiously enough, for the period when it was Corbyn and May, on Wikipedia, there's just this, which is the straight off comparing May's lead over Jeremy Corbyn, where they're both really unpopular, but this just shows how much more popular than Corbyn May is, according to these figures. So if we just compare that to where we are now, at the end of November, these only go up to the end of November, which I found interesting, which found Boris Johnson at +2, Corbyn at -39, and Swinson at -24%. So let's just go have a quick look here. Look, let's come to 2015, the election in 2015 we want. What date was the election in 2015? I don't know if anyone remembers. Let's just have a quick look. General election 2015, Wikipedia. Now this, of course, is the election that led to Brexit. So here we go. 7th of May 2015. So that's the date we want. 2015. Okay. Well, they had these figures up to the end of April. Perhaps they're not allowed to do it during election purdah. That's an interesting thing. Well, the last ones there were Miliband on -19, Cameron on -2, and Nick Clegg on -21. So let's just compare those. -39, +2, and -24. So on the face of it there, it doesn't look good for the Quals for Jeremy Corbyn. But I'm going to just make an argument for why those Quals are not necessarily as solid an indicator as they would be. Now, just for the sake of 2017, where this is it was June. In the June, it was June the 8th, wasn't it? So this is post the election. So 2017. Right, okay, so going into the June election, Mrs May had a 9-point lead over Jeremy Corbyn, who was at 39%, and she was at 48% approval. It's not directly comparable there, but you can see what I'm actually just getting at here. And that is that the Quals lead the Quants, and therefore the personality politics of the leadership is important and feeds back into the quantitative polling as regards actual votes cast for everybody else out in the country, as it were. Now, let's just go through the blog and I'll take you through the rest of my reasoning from there. So the data is extensive but informative, as we've just seen. The most unpopular leader in this period is Clegg with -65%, then Corbyn, who hit -60% in September this year, beating Miliband's -56% from November 2014. See Crosby says below. Now, I'm going to click on that in a minute. So Nick Clegg, there we are, 29th to 30th of May 2014, -65%. Jeremy Corbyn in September, 13th to 16th of September, -60%. That's a whopping great figure, obviously. And Ed Miliband, 27th, 28th of November, -56%. Apart from this, -60%, Mr. Corbyn isn't really any more unpopular than Ed Miliband was. To give you some idea of what Lytton Crosby means when he says about you need to get the surrogates to do the attacking, etc. If we just open this link here and let's just listen to what Lytton Crosby says here.
Campaign for people to report, there's been this surge in the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party, and that's upsetting the dynamic for Labor. The first time we picked that up was in November of 2014, when in discussions in focus groups people said Ed Miliband's a very weak man. If the SNP do really well and he relies on them to govern, they will push him around. Who knows what we would get? And that was from the mouth of voters well before anybody had picked up this sense. So we started building on that then. It wasn't something.
So we started building on that then, and they obviously didn't hang around because, as we've just seen, the most unpopular point in Ed Miliband was at the end of November 2014, minus 56%. And this is the focus groups and then getting out these messages. If you watch the whole of that video, and the blog I did about that, it shows the different approaches which Crosby has to polling and messaging. And one of the things he says, just from memory now, one of the things he says is that what's one nation conservatism? If you go down to the bus stop and ask someone what they're not going to be able to tell you. And I've noticed that Boris has been actually banging on a bit about one nation conservatism, trying to get away from the austerity and the nasty party thing. So that's quite interesting. So the raw data I'm currently crunching into an analysis comparing Quals, Quants and media events and media narratives appearing before polling day. But I cannot promise that as I have other pressing business priorities at the moment. So positive approval of any leader has been very rare in the period, and I think I've spotted some interesting correlations as to media coverage and timing of electoral events. My main interest is to see how strong the election bias rules Purdah effect is. But anyone who thinks that the media effect of the Murdoch press, BBC and mainstream broadcasters is still not a hugely important factor, and of course that of Google and Facebook Twinger censorship waiting this time around simply has not been paying attention. Now this Twinger word here, if you click on that, you'll come to a blog I did about the Project Veritas stuff from the States and the revelations of the whistleblower Zachary Voorhees, and effectively he talks about the algorithm. They're twiddlers, not twingers. These twiddlers, which is a way of twiddling what people get to see on the internet, and it's all plausible deniability, all of that sort of thing. But this is actual proper confirmation that this goes on, and of course if Google are doing it, Facebook do it too. Of course they do. But that's what that links to, and it's an interesting article looking at those revelations. So just moving along, then there's a link to the spreadsheet I was just navigating around, and then for now, though, remember the Quals lead the Quants. So let's have a listen.
Which assess economic competence and prime ministerial qualities, and as the great Australian Lytton Crosby says, the qual leads the quant, mate. And
the qual leads the quant, mate. So do watch that. But to remember, Boris Johnson is a rhetorician and a sophist. Now, he's a classically educated man, and he's a big fan of Pericles, who was a famous Greek tyrant, and he actually has a debate which he had with Mary Beard, and Mary Beard is here talking about Boris Johnson's Ciceronian rhetoric. Now, Cicero was a famous Roman orator, and rhetoric is the art of persuasion, which was taught by the sophists And the sophists actually go back to pre-Socratic philosophy. I don't want to get. I'm trying to keep this kind of in the mainstream lane, if you like. The lane I swim in. I come from a tradition of philosophy and classics. My education is a working class, comprehensive schools, army schools, etc. I didn't go to Eton, and I didn't study classics at Oxford, and I wasn't a member of the Bullingdon Club or anything. So I'm not a Boris Johnson, but I've read a lot of the same stuff that he's read, and obviously my own interpretation of it probably differs to many of his perceptions, and I think his impressions of it are learned, whereas mine are actually through lived context, if you like. It was the patron saint of translators is Saint Jerome, and Saint Jerome said about translation that when you translate something, you should weigh it out as if weighing out grain or gold, as opposed to in a sense for sense way, as opposed to pound for pound. So you don't translate word for word, you should translate context to context. And Pushkin said, who's a famous Russian poet, he said that translators are the false horses of the Enlightenment, and he's getting at the same point that St. Jerome gets at in terms of weighing out your translation. The sophists were basically responsible for teaching the upper classes, children and what have you. Anyway, let's just hear what Mary Beard says, who's a much greater classical scholar than either myself or Boris Johnson, and this is what she has to say about Boris before this debate here, Greece versus Rome, which is an IQ squared debate, which is very interesting.
He talks a lot about how you do it, but it's all terribly dry. It's all about, you start here and you have to have this, and then you have to end with the peroration. And I'm going to try, I'm going to be a girl speaking from the heart. I think, the only way to do this is to say what I think. And, Boris, he's really trained in classical rhetoric. That's all he does. And I think the one way you can undermine those high-level rhetoricians is just go for the jugular. So I shall try to go for the jugular.
So Mary Beard suggests that she will go for the jugular, and boy does she go for the jugular in that. And Boris, frankly, flounders in this debate. I mean, he loses hands down, regardless of whether you prefer the Greek classical tradition to the Roman classical tradition. It really doesn't matter. But Mary Beard makes Boris Johnson look like a dunce. There are two readings actually from two actors that appear. It's a great debate, and it's well worth watching. But going for the jugular, and this is what Jeremy Corbyn must do tonight. He must go for the Brino jugular. This is part of the purpose for making this video, is to, one, look at the Quals, i.e. the personality polling, leadership approval polling, but two, how to translate that into the quants. Now here the two are, a lot of people will be watching this. Boris Johnson, trained classical rhetorician, and he is going to stick to the script, and that's why he's not going on Andrew Neil. That's why he doesn't want to get away from his sound bites, which is his "Let's get Brexit done," which is an anagram, I'll never tire of pointing this out, of getting exploited, getting extorted rather. Let's just go back up to here and just let's just recap on that. Let's get Brexit done. We've all heard him say it. Get Brexit done. And get Brexit done is an anagram of being extorted. Remember that. So we've heard from Mary Beard about going for the jugular. Where is the weak point? The weak point is Brexit for Johnson. Brino is not Brexit, and the TTIP is also not Brexit, not in a meaningful way which ends austerity and ends the domination of corporations in our political lives. And whether we're political people or not, the politics of the day do really affect our lives. So anyway, the Quals lead the Quants, and Jeremy Corbyn's chance again tonight is to make the most of the election purdah period where he gets to say what he needs to say. And what he needs to say is that the EU is a flawed institution. The EU is an anti-democratic institution, and the EU, since the Maastricht Treaty, which morphed into the Lisbon Treaty, and now particularly under the de Leon regime, they're doubling down on that anti-democratic stance. The EU is a club for cartels. It started off as a coal and steel cartel, and now it is a cartel for global corporations. And the EU is not the answer to the social problems and the social contract problems which are faced by the UK. It also is not the answer to the problems that France is having, and the answers to the Spanish problems, how the EU have treated the Catalans, the Basques, the Wallonians, the Irish, that's the area, the Southern Ireland, how they treated the Greeks. All of this stuff has happened since 2010, and Brino is not Brexit. And the other big one on Brexit is EU military unification, and I can't stress that enough. EU military Boris has not been mentioning it. We've just had the NATO thing. Nigel Farage was threatened to mention it. If you watch UK Column, you'll see him in his own words say, yes, I've got questions, and Mr. Trump will have them. And it's gone by without comment. There are D notices all over EU military unification, but look at UK Column and see what that is. If we're in EU military unification, we are not in control of our own destiny, and Brino, which does nothing about the EU military unification, which completely subsumes our own central military command structures and transfers all of their responsibilities in an executive way to the greater EU military union, and the EU's ambitions for the North Africa theatre, as they see it, extending the southern borders of Europe to the North African continent, above sub-Saharan Africa, and that is the game of France. And France is the French franc is still in use in parts of that part of Africa. Obviously, the French colonies that used to be in Algeria, etc. But there are a lot of intrigues in that part of the world, not least the Libyan intrigue, which was led with the EU in conjunction with Hillary Clinton's State Department. Also Ukraine, and in Ukraine, again, EU and Hillary Clinton. So the EU is completely and utterly embroiled in this whole impeachment idea in the States at the moment, that somehow President Trump is now the bad guy in Ukraine. The bad guy in Ukraine was Victoria Nuland and Clinton and John Kerry, and also Mogherini, who's in that post at the EU at the time, and the same in Libya, and the same in Syria. So in terms of international relations, Jeremy Corbyn has hinted at these things, but in tonight's debate, going for the jugular, EU military unification, Brino is not Brexit, the EU has no interest in reform, so reforming the EU is really quite a joke. And I would say that Jeremy Corbyn should come out and say there will be a real Brexit option. The two options will be remain as you were or leave, and leave on Lexit terms. And what also needs to be carefully explained is which aspects of the Labour manifesto potentially fall foul of EU austerity rules. Now, on austerity, what we have to remember is that austerity is baked into the Lisbon Treaty cake. The European Central Bank and all of that, Herr Schäuble, all of that, how Greece has been treated, and how France at the moment is falling foul of all of the same measures which Greece was falling foul of, and how one rule for Macron's France and another for Tsipras' Greece is it's an institution of double standards, double dealing, and it's an institution which stands for global corporation cartels and banking cartels. Now, when challenged the other day, I noticed that Boris Johnson actually said, when challenged by Peston to name one trade deal or one big commercial deal with this avalanche of investment that's coming in, he quoted Goldman Sachs. Now, you couldn't make that up, and it's another reason why the trained rhetorician is actually very vulnerable to people going for the jugular, because his rhetoric does not stand up to scrutiny. Like beauty, rhetoric is only skin deep. And one of my favourite things on rhetoric is the rhetorician's Vade Vecum, which is by a Roman satirist called Lucian. And just from memory, he says something about you don't need to bring arguments to a debate, you merely need to bring the appearance of learning. So a book under the arm, a bunch of cheerleaders around you, falling on your every word. If you search Lucian in this blog, you'll find the quotes from the relevant parts. So Crosby says, the first time we picked that up was in November 2014. Remember, we're talking here about Ed Miliband being very weak and going to be pushed around by the SDP, the Scottish Nats. And of course, they're trying that one as well at this time, but they're really playing on this anti-Semitism trope and trying to get anti-Semitism to stick on a lifelong anti-racist, anti-prejudice person like Jeremy Corbyn is crazy. His connection with the IRA is less of a crazy point, but it's very nuanced and quite requires some explaining. And to explain it is not to excuse it. So again, to explain the anti-Semitism thing, but not to excuse it, there are arguments, and I would make them too, that Jeremy Corbyn ought to apologise for some of the things, but he is no more culpable for double dealing with the IRA than, say, Margaret Thatcher's government were, or governments before that. Again, if you search the Irish Troubles on my blog around the 2017 time, I do go into some depth about that. I'm from an army family, and we used to have to go to school with armed guards because the IRA were trying to kill us. I was in London Docklands when the IRA bomb went off, and I was on the sort of local police liaison for all of that. In fact, a lot of the footage of the bomb was taken on the roof of a building which my offices were in and which I used to run. The day before the bomb went off, I think I challenged the guy casing the joint. He was trying to, where the Docklands Audi dealership was, it's not there anymore, but it was for a while. It was a deal I did for Cyril Dennis of Capital and Provident. And it was interrupted for some time because the bomb blew up that thing. And in that attack, 2 newsagents died at the local newsagents in South Quay Plaza. But the day before, I saw someone trying the door at the old building, which became the dealership of Audi, and it was a deal I was doing at the time. So I challenged this guy. I told the police about all of this. and basically I saw a photo a couple of weeks ago of the guy that was either convicted or admitted to it, and it was him. As I say, I'm no friend of the IRA, but one has to accept that Sinn Féin have a point about the whole Irish question, and it's very complicated, and we shouldn't. We should stick to the Good Friday Agreement, and it's best that we keep that on track. And the fact that the EU have knowingly and willingly attacked the Good Friday Agreement is actually the people that the whole Irish question reflect most badly upon is actually the EU. Now, Andrew Neil made the point earlier that Boris Johnson has shafted the DUP. They're obviously the Democratic Unionist Party. The Tory Party is, of course, the Conservative and Unionist Party. Johnson uses political capital like one of the, I don't know, like a spendthrift uses a store card, maybe. That his personal ratings are as high as they are, I think, is as manufactured as Corbyn's being as bad as they are. I think in a less manipulated media, they would both still be unpopular, but more within the general trend. That, I think it's true to say that if David Miliband was leading the Labour Party, his Quals would be higher, but effectively you wouldn't put a cigarette paper really between Boris Johnson and David Miliband, frankly, or Boris Johnson and Tony Blair. So there we are. Mary Beard suggests that the way to deal with Boris Johnson's rhetoric is to go for the jugular, and so that's that. The revolution will not be televised is something which Lytton Crosby actually says in a long training video of his that I watched and put into this Crosby Show video as well. And that's making the point that you won't see in the media what's really happening on the ground, even if they weren't biased. And this is about bias in the Scottish independence referendum and this professor here, so that's worth watching too. Then I talk some more about political maths or statistics, polling, etc. Here we are. Benjamin Disraeli said there are 3 kinds of lies: damned lies, and statistics. 9 out of 10 people say that was Mark Twain. I thought that was very funny. So in terms of the establishment not wanting Brexit, they don't want Brino either, but Brino will do as a port in a storm, and that's what Boris is trying to deliver. My contention is that Jeremy Corbyn is actually a Lexiteer, as Tony Benn and the Tony Benn tradition, which saw the Maastricht Treaty and the Lisbon Treaty for the federalisation by stealth project that they were. And so, we don't want Brino shit or Brexit, we want Jexit or Legsit. And I wrote a limerick about that back in 2017. And then I did this hour-long video talking about having a vintage Rover Brexit. I mean, I've done a lot of blogging about these subjects, but this thing tonight, what I wanted to stress and stress again, is like Mary Beard said, to deal with the Caesarean rhetoric of Boris Johnson, you go for the jugular. And Jeremy Corbyn must do that tonight in this debate, and his Quals will benefit for it. Boris is in between a rock and a hard place on the Andrew Neil position now, because I don't think he's a sheep or a lamb. He can undo the damage that's already been done to a certain extent by going on, but what happens when he goes on? What would have happened on that, Jeremy Corbyn must do to him tonight. And so I'll get the transcript off this video, and you will see the questions which Andrew Neil said he was going to ask, and I'm going to do some work on that, along with this whole point about I think Corbyn's position on the EU referendum is perfectly understandable, but has more to do with dealing with the fifth column that still populates the ranks of the Labour Party, the Blairites, and not the right wing or more moderate social democratic type Labour people, if you like, that are on that wing of the Labour Party, but the absolute fifth columnists, and these are the neoliberal New World Order types, and there are various species of these people. There are different types of globalism, different ways of doing globalism, and there's a big argument going on between them, and that's part of the reason why Donald Trump is so loathed and pilloried in the press. But if you look at Donald Trump's quals, as it were, and then what actually happened in 2016 in the American presidential election, and what's likely to happen in 2020, is that people do eventually get it if the person being attacked is bold enough to stand up to it. And what do we do with the bully? And the media is a bully, and Boris is a bully. What we do with bullies, people, is we stand up to bullies. Always stand up to a bully. And that is what Jeremy Corbyn has to do tonight. I know he's got it in him. I'm sure he's got it in him. So, Jeremy, if you do by some chance see this, stand up to the bully. The bully, Boris Johnson, but also the bully, the European Union. Okay? Stand up to the bully. And it's only by standing up to the bully you can help the people I know you want to help. And that, people, is quite simply that. So let's see if we can get this Andrew Neil thing to play us out. I very much hope that we can. Here it is. I'm going to stream it a bit further.
When he uses a cash figure of an extra £34 billion. After inflation, the additional money promised amounts to £20 billion. He vows that the NHS will not be on the table in any trade talks with America. That he vowed to the DUP, his unionist allies in Northern Ireland, that there would never be a border down the Irish Sea. That is as important to the DUP as the NHS is to the rest of us. It is a vow his Brexit deal would seem to break. Now he tells us he's always been an opponent of austerity. We would ask him for evidence of that. And we would want to know why an opponent of austerity would bake so much of it into their future spending plans. We would ask why, as with the proposed increase in police numbers, so many of his promises only take us back to the future, back to where we were before austerity began. Social care is an issue of growing concern. On the steps of Downing Street in July, he said he'd prepared a plan for social care. We'd ask him why that plan is not in his manifesto. Questions of trust. Questions we'd like to put to Mr. Johnston so you can hear his replies. But we can't, because he won't sit down with us. There is no law, no Supreme Court ruling that can force Mr. Johnston to participate in a BBC leader's interview. But the Prime Minister of our nation will, at times, have to stand up to President Trump, President Putin, President Xi of China. So it was surely not expecting too much that he spend half an hour standing up to me. Good night.
So that was Andrew Neil there. Boris Johnson should be standing up to Andrew Neil. Jeremy Corbyn already has, but Mary Beard says the way to deal with this rhetorician is to go for the jugular. So Jeremy Corbyn must do that tonight. He must stand up to Boris Johnson. I've no doubt that Jeremy Corbyn could stand up to those other people, but standing up to the EU, which Boris has not done. That Mrs May bent over for them, as obviously she was willing to do, does not mean that Boris Johnson stood up to them. Far from it. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to play that all through from the beginning, but I'm also going to start this outro of this video with how I did the introduction, which is by singing the lyrics, the adjusted lyrics to Rolf Harris's Two Little Boys. So if you bear with me, I'll just tee up the music and see if I can actually get the timing a bit better this time. Where are we? Two little poles had two little quals, each had a spin machine. Gaily they talked each campaign day, orators both of course. One little pole then had a mishap, broke off his interview date. Wept for his quals, then cried with joy as his spin doctor said, "Do you think I would leave you waiting when there's the dead cat bounce to do? Climb up here, Boris, and don't be crying, I can fix it with a surrogate or two. When they grow up they'll both be poles, and their stalking horses not be toys. And I wonder if we'll remember when there were 4 surrogate goys." Short months passed, Brino came so fast, cowardly they swerved to stay. Electric roared loud, but in the woke crowd, cheering not dismay. Up goes a shout, Junker dashes out from the shadows blue. Gallops away to where Jezza lay, then when came a voice he knew. "Did you think I would let you exit when there's grooming left to do? Climb up here, Jez, and I will show you what the Fourth Reich will do." Jawohl! Did you say, Junker, I'm all a tremble? Perhaps it's the media's noise, but I think it's that I remember when we were 2 little poles. Do you think I would let you Brexit? There's no democracy for you. Climb up here, boss, and I will show you back to the Nazi rank so blue. Can you feel, boss, I'm all a tremble? Perhaps it's the battle's noise, but I think it's that I remember when we were into little boys. Okay, and with sounding the retreat there, with Bojo retreating furiously from this man Andrew Neil, let's play out with Andrew Neil's classic throwing down the gauntlet to the pre-Socratic sophist, the Caesarean rhetorician, Mr. Boris Johnson, who tonight will see his jugular a la Mary Beard in the gnashers of Jezza. So here we go.
One to be done. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister. We have been asking him for weeks now to give us a date, a time, a venue. As of now, none has been forthcoming. No broadcaster can compel a politician to be interviewed, but leaders' interviews have been a key part of the BBC's primetime election coverage for decades. We do them on your behalf to scrutinise and hold to account those who would govern us. That is democracy. We've always proceeded in good faith that the leaders would participate. And in every election, they have. All of them. Until this one. It is not too late. We have an interview prepared. Oven ready, as Mr. Johnston likes to say. The theme running through our questions is trust. And why so many times in his career, in politics and journalism, critics and sometimes even those close to him have deemed him to be untrustworthy. It is, of course, relevant to what he is promising us all now. Can he be trusted to deliver 50,000 more nurses, and almost 20,000 in his numbers are already working for the NHS? He promises 40 new hospitals, and only 6 are scheduled to be built by 2025. Can he be believed when he claims another 34 will be built in the 5 years? Can he be trusted to fund the NHS properly when he uses a cash figure of an extra £34 billion? After inflation, the additional money promised amounts to £20 billion. He vows that the NHS will not be on the table in any trade talks with America. But he vowed to the DUP, his unionist allies in Northern Ireland, that there would never be a border down the Irish Sea. That is as important to the DUP as the NHS is to the rest of us. It is a vow his Brexit deal would seem to break. Now he tells us he's always been an opponent of austerity. We would ask him for evidence of that. And we would want to know why an opponent of austerity would bake so much of it into their future spending plans. We would ask why, as with the proposed increase in police numbers, so many of his promises only take us back to the future, back to where we were before austerity began. Social care is an issue of growing concern. In the steps of Downing Street in July, he said he'd prepared a plan for social care. We'd ask him why that plan is not in his manifesto. Questions of trust. Questions we'd like to put to Mr. Johnston so you can hear his replies. But we can't, because he won't sit down with us. There is no law, no Supreme Court ruling that can force Mr. Johnston to participate in a BBC leader's interview. But the Prime Minister of our nation will, at times, have to stand up to President Trump, President Putin, President Xi of China. So it was surely not expecting too much that he spend half an hour standing up to me. Good night.
Right, okay, well there's the gauntlet, and just in closing, everybody, this is FeedSpot, which publishes the top 100 political blogs, and we're in this now at number 80. You have to send off your URL, and then they sort of decide whether you're in it or not. I was reading a blog the other day that was number 8, so I just sent my URL and I got this thing back. I don't know if it's a marketing thing or anything like that, but this blog is number 80 in this long list of political blogs. So there we are. That's that. So there we are. Couple of things I've been working on as well, which is I wanted to do a piece about nous. Now, nous again is a word used in philosophy, pre-Socratic philosophers, Aristotle, etc. But nous is the idea of thought or reason or common sense in a way, and different ways of thinking of things. Now, I believe the British electorate has the nous to suss out Boris Johnson and call him for the liar that he is, the liar and the cheat that he is. Now, think what you like about Jeremy Corbyn and the fluffiness, the left-wingness, the shabby geography teacherness, the smugness almost, or whatever. Let's put it this way. Jeremy Corbyn may be smug, as it happens that's my own personal view, but he is sincere, and his unpopularity is not nearly, I think, as extensive as the manipulated media machine would have us believe. Yes, I think he is unpopular with a large sector of society, including me, but using nous, reason, all the rest of it, weighing up all the things, bozzer with his false bonhomie and all the rest of it might be, you know, borderline bully in the playground, as it were, but he's no more popular, really. I mean, that doesn't hold water for, you know, a lot of the argument, but I think Andrew Neil is really pointing out the shortcomings of Boris Johnson. It's a sort of a learned, a pretended, a practiced, it's a sophist, rhetorician's way of deceiving, whereas I don't think Jeremy Corbyn sets out to deceive. I think there are things that he's wrong about. I think there are things that he's right about. Is he pragmatic? I think probably yes, more so, say, than John McDonnell. But as I say, on EU, I think he should show his full colours about the EU and its unreformability and go for Boris's jugular, because the weak point in Boris's position isn't Brexit, because he's not delivering that, it's Brino, and Corbyn needs to go for the jugular and point that out. So that's all I'm going to say today. I've no idea how long this has been, but there we are.